Good morning. I'm so glad to be with you all here today. My name is Jenny Jordan, and I am on the Provider Relations team at Developmental Pathways. I've been working in the disability field for over 18 years, and I've seen many families make that transition between school and adulthood, and helping families understand the system and how to navigate it is a passion of mine. My understanding from the event organizers is that today we primarily have parents, educators, and other professionals joining us. If there happens to be any students tuning in, welcome. I'm glad you're here. My disclaimer, for the sake of clarity and time, is I will be framing most of the presentation towards family members. So if you are a student listening in, we still have some good stuff for you. Just please forgive that I'm orienting everything towards kind of parents primarily. Another note is that I will be using the terms students, loved ones, and individuals and services interchangeably. This is all meant to reference young adults with disabilities, kind of no matter where they are in school or not. Perhaps as compared to some of the other presentations, this one might be a little bit less process oriented and more towards things to think about and consider as a family and some high level system views. So what we're really going to get into in this section is the burning question of how will I or how will my loved one spend time once school is done. Next slide, please. So to address this big question, we're going to dig into 4 key elements: addressing supervision, work and day program options, and briefly touch on the request for proposal process, also known as the provider selection process, that some folks have already touched on a little bit earlier as well. Next slide. So supervision. So I think one of the differences between school and adult services is that we always are quantifying an individual's supervision needs. So while in school, it might not be uncommon for a person of responsibility to know where that student is at all times. For most young adults, it is not customary to have a parent or teacher around 24/7, however. But for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, it may be necessary to have someone ensuring that they are safe or supported when needed. In the adult system, as Brittany touched on, this is quantified into supervision levels. We identify what sort of supervisory supports does an individual need at home, in the bathroom, in the community, at day program. So case managers, providers, and teams will attempt to describe what this should look like so everyone can be on the same page and ensure that the individual gets the support that they need. So before proceeding, I want to call out that this will be highly individualized. There are students who are considering getting their driver's license on one end of the spectrum, and there's others who might be thinking, or that their teams might be thinking, oh, we can never leave them alone. So please know I acknowledge the diversity of needs and know that some students might be significantly impacted. For the sake of this section, I'm going to err on the side of encouraging independence, which may press outside comfort zones if it's not an area that you've considered much yet. My hope is that we can encourage families and teams to put thought into what the individual actually needs and how to support them in skill building, no matter where they are on that spectrum. I fully recognize that these discussions and outcomes will be as individualized as the people involved. I hope that in planting the seeds about supervision, that everyone can take away something meaningful or thought-provoking. So with that in mind, let's dig in. Next slide. So some things you can begin to consider now, whether you're in school or on the verge of shifting out of school, is can your loved one stay at home alone for any amount of time? If so, how much time? Could this be an everyday thing or just in a pinch? with the remote world that COVID has introduced us to, the question might be, can your loved one take care of themselves unsupervised for a stretch while the parent works in the basement? You're also going to want to consider what skills or supports might be needed for them to be at home alone or unsupervised. And to what would it take to extend that time if they have some of those basic skills? So some skills might be the ability to use the phone or to call, so they can call a parent or emergency services. It could be the ability to make a snack. It could also be having the awareness of what to do when someone comes to the door. Supports could be having a phone or a device that they can use to alert someone that they need help, or perhaps a neighbor that comes to check in at certain times. Additionally, you can consider, are there places in the community where your loved one can be without someone specifically watching over them? How does that change based on whether it's a place that your family frequents or a place that's more contained? So for example, are you comfortable with them going to the bathroom on their own if it's at your family's favorite restaurant and the bathrooms aren't anywhere near the exit? Another thing to consider is if you're at church and there's a potluck, would it be okay if a parent stepped out of the room to wash a bowl while the student sat and chatted with fellow parishioners? You may have different answers for these settings as compared to the mall food court or going to Elitch's, and that's okay. Being able to identify the situations that feel okay and which are currently beyond comfort will help you hone in on where additional supports or trainings is needed. Next slide. So to break it down, it's wise to take time to evaluate the current supervision needs. You're going to consider what the student or family may want it to look like in the future. And I would say dream a little bit and definitely include the student in these conversations. Then you can identify any gaps that exist from current needs to that future vision. So this could include safety skills regarding food prep, crossing the street, locking or unlocking doors. It might be stranger awareness or responding to emergencies, basic first aid, etc. So once you have a sense of where those gaps are and identify which ones you want to tackle at this time, you can create and implement a plan to expand those skills that are needed to position for that future that you're envisioning. And P.S., you can leverage your transition program or schools. You could, if you're currently in the waiver, tapping into some of those other services to help in developing some of these skills. Before closing out on the supervision topic, I want to focus on how this relates to how the individual may spend their time once school ends. I know many students who qualify for transition services may not be in the position to stay at home alone, or at least not for long stretches. However, what they are able to engage in and how it impacts your family may change based on some of these factors. So, for example, if a day program finishes around 3 p.m. and the provider drops them off at home around 3:30, if your loved one has the ability to get into the house and can spend up to an hour alone, then you as parents might not have to leave work early. Or perhaps if a parent is working at home, they get home from that day program, maybe the parent takes some time to get them settled and then is not specifically supervising them, but is still in the building, and they can continue working for an hour or two. So I realize it's not a news flash, but the more independent the student can be, the more flexibility the family has. So as you shift into adulthood, it's worth digging into what current needs are, and not just to press along with the way things it's always been done, because adulthood and school are different, and that individual is going to continue to learn and grow. So it's a topic that always should be frequently revisited on where are they at, and where can we maybe give them a little bit more independence or autonomy. Next slide, please. So now that I've planted the seeds about supervision, let's dig into some options for how an individual may spend their time now and after school ends. So first one up is employment. Next slide. So employment can be an option for anyone. And I'm going to repeat it because it's so important. Employment can be an option for anyone. With the right supports, anyone can work. So we in Colorado are very fortunate that Colorado is an employment first state. So what does that mean? In 2016, the state legislature passed a bill which promotes work outcomes for all people, including those with significant disabilities. It established a collaboration between state agencies like the Department of Human Services, the Department of Labor and Employment, the Department of Higher Ed, and Healthcare Policy and Financing, or HCPF, which oversees the Medicaid waivers. This collaboration has tasked that group. So the collaboration is tasked with identifying barriers to employment and to make changes to policies and processes to make it easier to navigate and to promote employment outcomes, specifically those that meet the definition of competitive integrated employment, or CIE. The short version for CIE is that the people should be paid at least minimum wage, and specifically are compensated with wages and the level of benefits provided to other employees in similar positions. And it's at a location where the employee interacts with people other than just those with disabilities to the same extent that other employees do. This may seem like it's a philosophical or like just policy oriented. However, I can tell you that we are seeing some positive impacts. So for example, the SLS and DD waivers can begin funding supported employment services as soon as an application is submitted to the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. This means you don't have to wait to start your job search while paperwork is being processed. You can also tap into multiple funding sources to support work goals. And there are services that can help folks explore different types of work environments and kind of discover what they might enjoy and be good at. Next slide, please. So the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, or DVR, is designed to support people with disabilities achieve their work or occupational goals. They are the go-to agency for community integrated employment. And as a rough overview of their process is they've got an intake and application phase. There's an evaluation and assessment phase, all of which will lead to developing an occupational goal. Often, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities benefit from job development, which includes having an agency work with the individual to do things like completing applications, creating resumes, maybe doing practice interview skills, and then also just talking to employers on behalf of the individual. Once there is a job offer, then the agency can support through job coaching, which helps the person learn the job. It might include making pictorial reminders or developing systems to help them remember what comes next, or implementing timers so that they're aware of when things might need to happen. And it also can include helping the person get to know their coworkers. Now, DVR is meant to be a temporary support. So once there is a successful job placement, DVR is going to start fading back. If the individual needs ongoing support, the SLS and DD waivers can cover that additional job coaching support or to meet their supervision needs at work. Job development, job coaching, and extended job coaching are all considered part of supported employment. Now, DVR can offer a variety of supports and services. This could be job trials or situational assessments. So getting those different opportunities to look at different work sites, different environments, getting a sense of what do you like or what do you not like. DVR can also cover the cost of trainings. They could cover certifications, equipment, assistive technology, kind of whatever is identified as a support that they might be needed based on that vocational goal. One of the things that DVR recently added to their service list is benefits counseling, which is super exciting. As Amy touched on and Anna as well earlier, there's a lot that gets put into setting up these benefits and maintaining the benefits. And so it's a high priority for many to want to keep those in place. And there are some impacts that wages can bring, but you can meet with a benefits counselor or do benefits planning, and they can help you with an individual response in terms of, well, how much could I make? Or what would the impacts be? What kind of Medicaid would I be on? And really give that informed look so you can make choices related to work. And then again, job development and job coaching support are also heavily covered through the DVR process. Next slide. So the good news is that you don't have to wait. You do not have to be on the waiver in order to start with DVR. You can get started as young as 15. You can also be working with DVR and start the intake process with developmental pathways. So they are designed to be fairly fluid, and whichever you start first, you can keep going with the other. Hopefully kind of at the end, you might have the waiver set up and a job, and then the waivers can support you in that job ongoing. Just in general, there's a lot of additional funding and opportunities available for youth. So getting connected with that DVR counselor can give some insights into what might be available. And definitely want to say it's not the only place for students to get exposure. So through transition services, if there's the ability to look at different work sites or different activities, really digging in to see, what do you like? What do you not like? It can really help in just that person making informed choices as they proceed into adulthood. One suggestion I do have is that if you are connected with developmental pathways and you have a case manager, is to submit your DVR application to your DP case manager, and they can submit it to DVR. The benefit of this is that we can help kind of fast track, because we already have some information on you that DVR would find helpful, and so you don't have to start from scratch. And it gets you directly connected with DVR counselors that have a familiarity with the IDD population. That being said, you don't have to be with a case manager. You can directly submit that application to DVR. My recommendation in that circumstance would be making sure that they know upfront that your loved one has a developmental disability, and perhaps saying that you're connected with developmental pathways, or that you're in process with intake or whatnot, so you can get connected to those DVR counselors that have that expertise. Next slide. Now, let's shift gears to day program or day habilitation options. So even if a person is working, they may be interested in connecting with a social group, or they might find that they have time in their week where they need support, or they don't want to stay at home. So in short, individuals may work and participate in day program services. You also might have some people who might primarily tap into day program services. So next slide. So what are day program services? So the most common day program service is Supported Community Connections, or SCC. As its name conveys, this should be out in the community. This is often a group of individuals with disabilities, though you might find some one-on-one options. Every agency structures their time and activities differently. There are some that do a lot of volunteer work, some frequent parks or malls, museums, libraries, some engage in sports. The bottom line is that they should be out in the community and using the real world as the learning environment, as opposed to the agency's like base site location. So this is where specialized habilitation comes into play. So specialized habilitation, or SPEC-HAB, as it's sometimes referred to, is specifically held at the agency's base site location. So depending on the agency, it might be at an office complex or a strip mall, kind of wherever they've got that real estate space for themselves. The individuals with the disabilities should be working on something that engages them and promotes their skill development in some way. So this could be an extension of school, working on handwriting or reading or money skills. They might engage in crafts, or maybe talk about current events and how it relates to their lives. It is not uncommon for an agency to provide both the supported community connections and the specialized habilitation to the same individual within the same day. They may spend part of their time at the base site and then go out into the community. The core hours many programs have is very commonly about 9 a.m. to about 3 p.m. However, there are some day programs that do activities in the afternoons or evenings. These usually are more like a social group outing kind of setups. But getting to know what day programs, connecting with individual day programs and finding out what they're doing is going to best answer kind of what is the schedule and what is the activities. And we'll touch on that in a moment. Additionally, I want to mention pre-vocational services. This is another base site program that is for a group of people with disabilities. They should be working towards a goal of employment in the community, and they are specifically limited to 5 years of pre-vocational services. We're seeing less and less of these sites because of what we found is that they're not sustainable for agencies. And to be honest, the model hasn't been found to promote employment despite its name. To that end, if you want to go the day program route prior to exploring employment, I personally would recommend going with an agency that does a lot of volunteer work through that supported community connections. Volunteering can give real life experience with like completing tasks and interacting with coworkers or other volunteers, and in ways that can't really be replicated in those like base site kind of environments and situations. Plus, it doesn't hurt to add volunteer experience to one's resume. Lastly, I do want to call out that transportation to and from work or to and from day program can also be covered through the SLS and DD waivers. And there is a limit to the amount of day program that an individual can receive. And that's something that your case managers can work with you on the nuances with that. But just to be aware that you can't just spend your whole time hanging out with friends out in the community. There's specific timings and amounts that can be approved for that. Next slide. So how do you connect with or decide on a day program provider? So what I suggest is ask your case manager to submit a request for proposal or RFP to identify agencies that have availability. I'm going to touch more on this process on the next slide. Once you have some providers identified, you can interview those agencies to get a feel for their activities and their priorities. We have a list of questions that you can reference and customize. You can take a tour of the site, or you can ask to shadow an activity. You can ask the provider for a copy of their monthly activity calendar. Then make sure to talk to your loved one and consider, is this how they want to spend their time? Are these the people that they would want to be with? Do you think that the agency would help support the goals that you have for them? And while this can definitely feel like a big decision, remember that you can change providers at any time. You're not locked in to one place. Also, as your loved one grows and changes, their day program needs and placement may also change. Next slide, please. So I want to briefly touch on the developmental pathways request for proposal or RFP process. This is something that both Anna and Brittany touched on as well, but here's a visual to go with it. Case managers can help connect you with approved providers for waiver services. So this would be people who are in SLS or the DD waiver or one of the children's waivers. The RFP process will connect you with program approved service agencies, or if you're going for the acronyms, as we heavily do, it's PASA, P-A-S-A, program approved service agencies. And this RFP process is available to you for most services, again, not just day programs, so you can connect with residential providers through the same method, and those others that might come into your home. The RFP process works for all of those service types. So the general flow is that the case manager is going to create a profile about the individual that kind of outlines their wants and needs. This will be de-identified, so it doesn't share the specific individual name, but paints a picture of who they are. That profile is sent out to all of our qualified providers. And then we will get responses back from those providers that are articulating that they are interested and available. And this is kind of the step where you might want to do those tours or those interviews, things of that nature. Kind of your decision process is at this step. And then once you've selected a provider, the case manager can add it to the service plan and services can begin. Next slide, please. So in summary, there are many options for students after exiting the school system. Lots of things of how they can spend their time, and you can look at those options and adjust and customize, and it might change. How someone spends their time, again, will evolve and might be a combination of service types and providers. And hopefully you're hearing there's a lot of excitement related to employment, a lot of good momentum that's happening, funding to support those efforts. especially for youth. So I think the opportunities that youth have in 2022 is greater than what they had, say, 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So definitely encourage you to explore those opportunities because there's more there than there has been historically. And finally, investing the effort into developing those safety and independence skills to minimize supervision needs or be specific in where that supervision is needed will increase the opportunities and the comfort levels, giving more options perhaps. However, services will meet people where they are at any point on the journey.